This program is sponsored by Data Miner and Leidos. Welcome to the latest program in a new series from FedGov Today, AI in Depth. I'm the host of FedGov Today, Francis Rose. A new piece of legislation in Congress calls for the appointment of chief artificial intelligence officers at every agency. But agencies are ahead of the game. Most agencies have already designated their CAIOs, and most have some kind of pilot projects, use case development, or other AI work already underway. You'll go in depth with movers from government and industry that are leading AI efforts today. Leaders from the Transportation Security Administration, Defense Innovation Unit, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, the General Services Administration, the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, Data Miner, and Leidos are here to discuss what they're doing with AI now, what it means, and what's ahead for AI and for government-industry collaboration. We begin with Matt Gilkison, Chief Technology, Data, and Artificial Intelligence Officer at the Transportation Security Administration, and Paul Tierney, Senior Vice President for Public Sector Sales at Data Miner. Welcome to both of you. Thanks for joining me. I'll start right with use cases right up front. Matt, what are you doing at TSA with artificial intelligence, either mission delivery, back office, or some combination of both?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity here. As you know, artificial intelligence is not a new thing in terms of development. I think what's new is that we've federated the access. You now have language, plain language access to the models and to the technology beyond having to have an electronics degree that you had to have in the 50s and a computer science background that you needed to have throughout the 80s and 90s. And so TSA has been doing a lot in terms of security detection, looking at how we can increase our object recognition to increase the ability for passengers to efficiently process and securely then access travel and transportation. We're also looking at a couple other use cases with regard to how we improve our customer experience. We think that there's a large opportunity to be able to leverage the language models to be able to improve the chat approach. And so we're looking at our TSA call center that takes all the kind of calls about how do I pack, or what do I bring, or how do I get access to pre-check, and looking at how we can use our knowledge base of information that we already have established to increase our ability for the customer support staff that are taking those phone calls to respond to the passenger and prepare them for travel.
What's driven that federation in your view? Is it the technology that's driving it? Is it a demand signal from your folks that are saying, I'd like to be able to use these tools, and so somebody has to respond to that? What's behind that?
Yeah, there's two things, I think. You've got technology that's advanced in the last couple of years that have really opened the aperture up to the average citizen to be able to, in plain language, interact with commercial models. And in that concept, we want to be able to take advantage of that to take us to the next level from an efficiency perspective and from an experience and customer service perspective. And so one of the things, a really proud moment to be inside the Department of Homeland Security with the Artificial Intelligence Executive Order that the White House released last fall. It really energized and galvanized a kind of congregation around the idea of responsible use, which for TSA is a new term, but not a new concept. Since we were formed, we've been testing our equipment for security, safety, accessibility, equity, and performance. And really, responsible use bundles all of those things together and ensures that when you're deploying and reviewing technology, you're doing it with a lens on how it performs, characterizing how it operates. And I think the demand signal comes from the need to be able to adopt the new technology, take advantage of the capability that we can enhance, and apply those kind of principles that have been outlined there. Back to why it's exciting for DHS is the CIO at the department has leaned in and given authority to use commercially generative tools for publicly available information. This means that we can upskill our workforce. Our users can start seeing how to use these tools with safe use cases and be able to start being prepared for when we can ingest this technology inside our environment and provide a more secure environment for computing with more sensitive information. It's a really exciting opportunity.
Paul, thanks for joining us today. What you're seeing, what Matt's talking about at TSA, how does that sync with what you're seeing as you're talking to people all across government?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Francis. What we are seeing is really a staggering amount of publicly available information that's out there. and government agencies are struggling with how to harness that to forward their mission. So when they come to us, they're saying, how can we use AI tools to look at the scale of publicly available information, but also derive meaningful insights out of that to help keep people safe and secure and help government service citizens?
I think I'm going to guess it was 10 years or so ago that I started to really talk actively to people like Matt and others at agencies all across government about the proliferation of data that they were seeing. It was, I think, the first time that the government started to really say, we have all this data, we should get our arms around it, we should start to understand it. What you just talked about there about meaningful insights was the first step, I think, that agencies were taking. How are organizations, in your view, in government getting at being able to determine this is what we would like to know from the data that we have, and thus, what are the tools that we should apply to it, and how should we apply those tools? It strikes me that's the first question.
Yeah, right. So I think with that staggering amount of open source data, the questions that can now be answered or the insights that can be derived is also growing. And as we get our hands around that data, I think government agencies are learning more and more that we can learn more about what's going on in our world from using that data. Let me give you an example. So recently there was an evacuation in Sudan where multiple government agencies had differing views on what was going on the ground, and therefore it was difficult to make decisions on what to do next. By leveraging not just social media, but pictures, images, video, news report, audio coming out of that event, government agencies are then able to look back, get a full view of the events on the ground, and then decision makers can take the actions they need to make sure that people are safe.
The 3 C's that data people told me about in that time period that I just described were collection, collation, and curation. And everything that you described about the use cases you're undertaking sounds like they fit into one of those 3 C's. Is that a fair observation?
It's a fair observation. I mean, in order to use the artificial intelligence technology that's emerged, you really have to have your data house in order. I'm the first chief data officer appointed at TSA, and so we're in some ways a little behind the rest of the agencies, but we're also, I think, able to capitalize on some of the emerging technologies in a way that maybe others aren't, because we haven't invested in some of the kind of capabilities that they've been developing over the past few years. We're in the process of putting a new data strategy out that will start getting at being transparent with how we're looking to organize ourselves around being able to provide access to the information. We know that if you use your data effectively, you can then adopt some of these technologies and you can provide better real-time decision making.
Matt, what do you have to do to make sure that you have collection and collation right before you get to curation in the model that I just laid out?
Yeah, I think there's some level of assumption you have to do that in a waterfall way. I think that you can do it in an agile way. I think that there is an existing data set that is available, and we can start looking at curating that information now. But in parallel, we're also looking at how we collect and what we collect to make sure that it's informed and built on what we need to do to answer the questions that we're looking to answer for the agency.
How do you determine exactly what those questions are? And how do you determine if the questions that people are coming to you with and saying, can we do this, really are artificial intelligence questions, or whether there's some other technology or some other technique that is more appropriate?
That's the fundamental question. I think the key is focusing on the user and the need. I've always tried to, in the technology world, look at what it is you're trying to accomplish in the physical sense. I keep an Arthur C. Clarke quote at the bottom of my email: any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And I do that to try and remind myself as a technologist not to get too nerdy, right? Not to get too geeky real quickly. And because it's easy to do that in this space. I think if you keep your eyes and lenses focused on what it is in the physical world that you're trying to accomplish, the analog will then drive the digital. You can then start making the determination for what tools and what automations you can put in place to start making those physical processes more efficient. I've always said, if you throw technology at a physical process and you haven't optimized or you don't understand that process, the technology is going to allow you to admire it. And it's going to shine right and bright in your face. And so the key is trying to make sure that you're able to look at the automation components, look at the problems that you're trying to solve in the real world, and then letting that drive where you apply the technology. Within artificial intelligence applications, you have to make sure that you have the right data available. You have to make sure that you understand the performance and the characteristics of how that model is intaking and training information, but also then how it's processing and putting out information within the data set that you have. I think it's important that when you're doing the training activity, there's a kind of industry standard that if you look at a really well curated piece of a data set, you want to take about 80% of it and keep about 20% back. 80% being your training data, 20% being the data that then you use to expose and test and measure performance. And then as you employ artificial intelligence technologies, you really have to make sure you have mechanisms in place for continuous monitoring. Because as you get exposure to new and different data sets, the model's going to perform a little differently, just like a human would ask different questions. And so it's really important to keep those measures in place.
Paul, that strikes me as maybe the most challenging thing. This entire landscape is changing constantly. New data sets, new additions to existing data sets, the things that people want to do change all the time. Are you seeing agencies kind of settling down with the idea of, we want to try some AI, and thinking more about the kinds of things that Matt's describing? Here are the problems that we have, here are the questions that we have, and maybe this isn't an AI issue, maybe this is some other technique or some other thing that way that we'll go about solving this problem.
I think what I'm seeing, Francis, is that as government agencies get their arms around the massive amount of data that's available out there, they're starting to look at it. Each agency is starting to look at it through their own individual lens and looking at their own problems. How do I solve my challenges with this massive data set and leveraging AI? I think one of the more recent examples that I have seen is in the cybersecurity world, right? So open source data allows government agencies to get a view into what their adversaries are doing from a cyber perspective that nothing else can provide. Agencies like CISA or DoD or others, TSA in Homeland Security, are looking at that and say, how do I need to adjust my security posture as a result of how adversaries are trying to attack us in the cybersecurity realm? So that's one area where I think these government agencies are looking at now to say, how can we leverage this massive amount of available data and our AI tools to make sure that we are protecting important infrastructure, our electrical plants, our water plants, pipelines, and obviously our personnel, both in the US and abroad.
Open source data really is at the core, I think, of where a lot of agencies are going now with AI, isn't it, Paul? Because of the proliferation of it, but also not having to worry about exposing the tools to security risks and other issues like that. Am I on the right track there?
I mean, the beauty of it, Francis, you're absolutely right. It's shareable. So if you think about in a humanitarian disaster, publicly available information can be shared with state and local partners, with non-governmental organizations that are assisting, with allies. So open source information does present a new opportunity for collaboration that I think didn't exist before, maybe with information that had some classifications or classified markings on it.
Mm-hmm. Are you at a point at TSA where you're exchanging data sets and also results of AI tools and the products that they deliver with the other components in the agency or with other partners across government?
We certainly have data exchange with the other components and with our stakeholders across the industry. I wouldn't say we're at the point where we're sharing artificial intelligence results, because the majority of the work that we're doing there is commercially available, publicly available information. I think your question about publicly available information is also important to consider. The large language models and the foundational models that exist today were largely trained on that publicly available information. And so that's kind of been the safest, lowest risk kind of operational environment. I do think that there are some more sensitive data sets and more secure environments that we're going to need to try and pioneer and identify how we ingest and how we operate to make sure that we're adhering to the cybersecurity principles. And looking forward, I think there's a lot of opportunity with the executive order and what the National Institutes of Science and Technology have been tasked to do with regard to some of the certification and testing activities.
When you start to expose some of those data sets that are currently classified or whatever the categories are, will that mean a difference in the way that you use the tools that you have? Will it mean that you want to use different tools because of the different natures of the data? What does that landscape look like?
It could be both. I mean, I think either way, you're looking at pulling software tools inside of an environment that's secured and separate. I think that it could mean that there are limitations in what you can perform depending on what you're able to install and operate. And I think there's a lot of great folks that are working to kind of determine what we can stand up internal and what we can't. And I think a lot of it comes back to the testing, characterizing the performance and characterizing the risk in terms of what we're operating.
Paul, as agencies start to take the open source data that they're using that's available to everybody, what do you expect to see them do as far as governance and so on when they start to maybe mix that with things that they have? For example, TSA collects a tremendous amount of proprietary data. The intelligence community does too. What does that melding, that merging of that data look like at some future point?
Yeah, Francis, I think the future is now when it comes to combining that information. I think we're seeing agencies like Department of Homeland Security take open source information, which previously was siloed and sort of outside the enterprise, and now combining that through APIs with existing information that they have, and allowing people like Matt to take advantage of the technological investment they've already made. They already have tools that they're using today for their operational workflow. Open source data can be another element that could be added that could help agencies gain more insights and make, frankly, better decisions than what they were able to do before.
We've talked a lot about tools so far in this conversation, Paul. What about the people that are using those tools? What does that workforce look like today, and what do you expect to see it evolve into at some future point? What will those people be able to do, or what will they need to know in order to really be effective at their jobs and to use these tools effectively?
Yeah, and Francis, I'm glad you brought up people, because I think critical to, Matt talked about the responsible use of the models, and I think critical to any AI is keeping humans in the loop. I don't think you can subtract the human component from the AI component. So when we talk about people, I think humans will continue to play a role in AI. I also think that for government personnel, being comfortable working with, the workforce needs to be comfortable working with AI, those types of tools, understanding really data and how to analyze it and glean insights from that. They don't have to necessarily be experts in the technology side, but really being able to ask really good questions is going to be more important now for really both industry and government.
We have less than a minute left. That takes us back to the federated idea that you talked about at the beginning of this conversation.
Exactly. I was going to pull that thread a little bit.
Yeah.
I think from a people perspective at TSA, we're not looking to employ the technology to eliminate any jobs. That's worth saying and worth repeating. We're looking to automate and create efficiency out of the existing jobs, allowing our staff to focus on security and security tasks that a human needs to perform. I think the federation piece is really important because plain language allows everybody to be involved. And it's a really good opportunity to rethink some of the efficiencies that we can create out of the work that we're doing.
Matt and Paul, thanks very much for joining me. I appreciate your time today. You can read more about TSA's AI efforts and find links to the resources we talked about at fedgovtoday.com. Up next, a cross-agency approach to AI. In Depth continues in a moment. Don't go away. If you want insights from agency and industry leaders on the latest topics in technology, management, workforce, defense, and acquisition, sign up for the FedGov Today podcast with me, Francis Rose. I release new episodes every Tuesday and Thursday, so you'll stay up to date on the issues that matter most to federal government leaders. Listen at fedgovtoday.com and everywhere you get your shows. Don't miss out on the conversation. Follow the podcast today. Welcome back. Agency use cases for AI include both mission delivery efforts and back office functions. And agencies are finding that collaboration with industry partners is one important component of success. Jamie Fitzgibbon is Program Manager in the AI and Machine Learning portfolio at the Defense Innovation Unit. Mittal Desai is Chief Information Officer and Chief AI Officer at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And Zach Whitman is Chief Data Scientist and Chief AI Officer at the General Services Administration. Zach, I start with you. What are some of the use cases that you're looking at GSA, either back office or mission delivery?
Yeah, thanks. I think this is a really cool opportunity, and thank you for having us. Part of the mission behind government and AI is to communicate what we're doing in a transparent and open way, and generate a dialogue and effectively generate trust with the public so that we can show this is how we practice with AI. This is how we control for the use cases that we're using. These are the things that we want to offer as transparency opportunities and communicate what are the ways in which we're going to find mission enhancements through better quality or more timely delivery of services. Some of the things that we're looking at, we've been approaching this in a crawl, walk, run type strategy where we're thinking about how would folks use these AI use cases today? What are some of the tools that are currently available, and where do the employees see opportunities to find efficiencies with their work? We have recently run out a relatively expansive study where we were trying to understand what were the use case behaviors for tools like ChatGPT or general LLMs that are currently in the public discourse today, because we wanted to understand from a evidence-based approach what were some of the use cases that we could apply down the line. And what we saw that there were three kind of categories of AI use cases. The first one was in content generation. We think that there's a direct application for first draft. When you're looking at a blank page, sometimes it's helpful to have a first cut at what you're trying to say. And then from there, you can apply your subject matter expertise to that content to validate that the content is correct and it's delivering what you need. The second one would be on a research-based approach, where you can use these tools to find information that you might not otherwise know exactly where to start. It's a step above just simply search engine, where you can ask questions and then follow up with secondary questions that often can generate a more tailored response for what you're looking for. And we saw some efficiencies in folks finding answers that they needed quickly. And then the third one was in code. Writing code, a coding assistance was a primary solution for us. Not only was it helpful in terms of generating code, but also in error or bug fixing, where you found an issue with your code. What's wrong with this code? We've done this in a safe way, in which we can apply guardrails and only allow for public information to be used with these public tools, but it provided an evidentiary baseline for us to say, okay, what are our next steps and how can we apply some internal tooling?
A couple of things there I want to come back to. Thanks for that, Zach. Welcome, Mittal. It's great to see you again. What are some use cases you're pursuing at FERC?
Yeah, thank you, Francis. So it's an exciting time at the FERC. We actually earlier this year kicked off an AI feasibility assessment. The outcome of that assessment we're looking to do is 3 phases. One is establish governance, where we would develop AI committees, where we would develop AI policies, and then what does AI within FERC look like organizationally? 2 was to establish, working with our program offices, developing AI inventories, where we could look at inventories that would support back office support services, but mission critical needs. And then third, from an AI perspective, we're looking at prototyping some of those use cases where eventually, if successful, we would productionize it. So right off the bat, we have identified 4 use cases that we want to look at intense. 1 is to leverage AI in our rulemaking process. 2 is to leverage AI in our safety inspections for critical infrastructure, specifically dam safety analysis. 3 is to do market surveillance, enhance our market surveillance activities where we would detect anomalies or fraud in the energy markets. And then the last one we would look to do is supporting interconnection requests for power projects. The first one, leveraging AI for rulemaking, is the one that we're going to prototype. We are hopeful that we will have, and we're very confident we'll have a prototype in the end of this year. What that will assume for us is that any order that FERC issues, there's a commenting period to the public. And so we get significant amount of comments that informs us if the order is sound or we need to make adjustments. So think about all the comment reviewers within our agency that have to review and disposition each comment. Looking at tools like natural language processing and intelligent automation, we're looking to see how we can do sentiment analysis, reduce the time to review those comments so we can effectually deliver orders faster. So we're in good shape. We've partnered across our program offices to really understand the business process of how they do that work, and then develop proper technologies to implement from the prototype and then test that eventually, hopefully by the end of this year.
A couple of things there I also want to come back to. Yep. I want to welcome you, Jamie. Thanks for coming on. You're in a unique situation, I think, at DIU because you're connective tissue for all parts of the Pentagon, Fourth Estate, the services, everybody. What are some of the things that folks are either coming to you and saying, I want to do this, or is AI the right solution for that, so on? What are those conversations like for you?
So it's funny because while it's very different than what we just heard coming out of GSA and FERC, if you boil it down, it really comes down to human-machine teaming. So how do we find those efficiencies, whether that's mission readiness, warfighter readiness, or in actual operations? How do we prepare to execute quickly should we need to fight? And so the things that we're hearing is a lot of similar dynamics of we have so much information, so much data. How do we get faster to the point where the SME, the analyst or the warfighter, can make a decision based on that, use their intelligence, not taking humans out, but how do we get them to a point where they can at least have the things that they need to? So, boiling it down to 50% rather than the 100% of information that they have to go through. So a lot of it has to do with just making sense of the information they have and really getting to target, right, whatever that is, and preparing their resources. We've had use cases like predictive maintenance. So the readiness side, how do we make sure we have the materials forward deployed so that aircraft is ready should that piece break? And then also things around, we're dealing with just understanding the landscape of our adversaries and where they are commercially developing technology. So really it's research. It's what we just heard from the other agencies, but applying it to the national security problem space.
What are the nature of the questions that Pentagon people are coming to you with changing over time as maybe they gain a greater understanding of what the capabilities are, or as the threat landscape changes, any factors at all? Or are people still thinking about the same kinds of things as they have been for the last couple of years?
I think obviously we're seeing the watermark rise. Everyone's getting a little bit more educated. So the questions that we're getting back to us are a little bit pre-prepared, whereas before the problems they were bringing were not appropriate for AI. And really it was, is this an AI problem or is this a process or a people problem? Now we're finding more of those things that are coming to have been triaged and really be more of, we know that we need AI. So that is where I have seen the maturation of the Defense Department and all the different agencies. And I would say we've definitely, the nature of the questions and the people willing to work on it, there's obviously more excitement. The executive order has something to do with that across the US government, but we're just seeing now that they've started to taste and see the benefits of AI, there's more of an appetite to go and explore.
When you have all talked about various projects that are getting underway, and Mittal, you have a couple that you mentioned specifically that you're prototyping. How does one know, how should one judge that a prototype is working fine and it's time to either scale it or apply those techniques, apply that process to something else? I'll start with you, since you brought it up.
Yeah, so we're in the process of standing up the infrastructure first, right?
Yes.
I think we're doing a lot of internals analysis, whether that infrastructure is on-prem versus the cloud. As we stand up that infrastructure, One thing that we've stood up is an AI working group which consists of employees across our program offices. These are the subject matter experts that work day to day in the prototype that we're looking to build. So as we build the prototype, we're keeping our employee base close to the prototype to be able to make a determination, okay, is this giving us the output that we expect? If that output is good, can we advance that to the next level? So from an initial operating capability, can we make it to full operating capability? On top of that, I think the other piece that we're looking to do is how do we make our infrastructure sound? FERC, as many agencies, has legacy applications. We're also on a journey in modernizing our core business applications to more cloud-based, low-code products. So is there a short-term need to productionize this right now? And if we can do that, we will. But then what is the long-term strategic plan, how we implement those AI technologies into what we're already modernizing long-term?
Mm-hmm. There's a distinction there, Mittal, that I think might be important. You talk about having subject matter experts involved in that working group. Are those AI subject matter experts, or, for example, you said one of the projects you're going to undertake is revolves around rulemaking.
Yeah.
Is it having rulemaking subject matter experts there to understand what the tools are putting out in the prototype?
We're putting the technologists with the actual folks that implement and regulate energy or emission.
Yeah.
So we're putting them hand in hand. So FERC is an agency full of lawyers, analysts. We have fish biologists. We have all sorts of different job series. And so those folks are going to be hand in hand with the technology folks as we implement. So we hope that we can reduce the time to deliver and make sure that any corrections that we need to make from a technology standpoint or business process point, we can implement that faster.
Jamie, you were nodding your head pretty enthusiastically as Mittal was talking about having the SMEs and the AI tech people kind of side by side. Why is that so important?
So a lot of the prototypes that I've run over the last 5 years have really sat nicely with the IC. And you can't take a model and deploy it on something that is very unique, that has cultural significance, historical, and is very unique to whatever mission you're trying to solve. So it is incredibly important, and what we've done with our piloting is having those mission users sit right there with the data scientists to make sure that the data feeds that are coming in are the right ones and the outputs are appropriate and trained. And I would say a lot of people talk about there should be no bias in your models. Well, sometimes you do want bias in your model, but you need to know what that is. You need to know how you're training it and or being aware of the biases that are in it, and then monitoring it because models slip and change over time. So really educating the SMEs on what the AI is capable of doing.
Does that sync with what you're doing at GSA, Zach?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's really interesting. I like that you were bringing up infrastructure and data being kind of foundational pieces to this. I think it's really quick. We get caught up in a lot of the energy that's currently, rightfully so, in terms of these new capabilities that are coming up. But in service of good mission delivery, we need to consider what are the foundational pieces that feed that work, and having a good infrastructural base to operate these models in, having good data sets to feed these models, again, to control for biases that may come forward due to systemic or data biases that might exist in our prior holdings, making sure that our data holdings are as good as possible to be consumed by these AI models is a different task than, say, just making data available. And us taking space to ensure that that infrastructural play is being done in advance only benefits us downstream, but that is pre-work that we need to make sure that is done and done well. And there's also the point about biases. Knowing that there are always going to be biases is critical going into this, and then knowing, okay, so how are we going to monitor these systems? How do they evolve over time as the environment changes? What are you deploying, and what kind of environment are you deploying it in matter in these use cases? It's not a simple technology question. It is a question about the context for which this technology sits. And having multiple SMEs and privacy experts, security experts, ethicists, everybody coming to the table, not necessarily the technical folks, but having a broad base of views into how these AI use cases are going to be used is really critical for us doing the good work that the EO and M2410 really lay out.
You hit on something there, Zach, that I think is important to highlight, and that is there is a lot of hype and a lot of discussion just about the concept of AI. And with all due respect to my friends that are involved in the cloud community, I don't think anybody walked around 5-10 years ago and said, boy, I can't wait to do something with the cloud. This is causing a lot of excitement. How does one separate the hype from the reality of the work that needs to be done and can be done to get these projects either out of the prototype phase to scale, or from scale in one area to scale in another area, that kind of thing, without getting people all worked up about it and kind of tempering expectations, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think the energy is good because it offers us a platform to communicate, like, look, this is how we're going to be doing it. And I mean, AI, if you ask data scientists, we've been doing this for a long time. This is not new by any means. The advents that we've seen recently, especially in the Gen AI space, have made it much more of like a public discourse. How are we using this and what are we using it for? And I think that the existence of this executive order and M2410 really are a great showcase for us to codify how we're going to be doing this in a very formalistic way. How are we going to handle rights and safety impacting? How are we going to be measuring the biases? How are we going to make sure that the data that we're using is appropriate for the use case? These are all really good conversations to be having. And for us to be empowered to be able to set policy and guidance for the agencies to say, this is how it needs to be done. Here are the formal mechanisms. Here's the safety teams that are going to need to exist. Give us a lot more transparency, and again, offer the opportunity for us to communicate our experience and our maturity to the public in our mission delivery efforts.
Jamie, I want to touch on something you talked about a moment ago, and that is when this discussion really started to happen in great quantity inside the department. You said a lot of the things people came to you to talk to you about weren't really AI problems. They were process problems and people problems. How does one discern the difference if one is trying to understand, here, this is my problem, is this a technology issue or is this a people or process issue?
That's a great question. So there's a couple ways you would tackle it. One is, do you have the data on hand? If you don't, throwing AI at it is not going to get you anywhere. Do you have the right process? If your process is broken and you throw AI at it, it just makes it more effectively broken. Like, it just goes faster in its processing. And then the other one is, if you are not ready with the incentive structure and the risk threshold to take on AI, AI is not going to solve your problem. Because there are so many other things that have to be, and I think you touched on it slightly, is, there's the infrastructure, but there's the adoption issue. So commercial technology is out there, and we can scope, and that's the other piece. Is there commercial technology, or do we need to build it? Where are we in what it is you need to solve your problem, whether or not AI can solve it. But also, are you ready to make that investment? Because commercial companies are coming, they're knocking on everybody's door. Vendors are saying, hey, we can do this, we can help you. But the moment they prototype and then you're like, this is great, but we haven't palmed for this. We have no money to pay for this. Or, I'm PCSing and I don't know if the next person cares. And then it drops. We're losing that connective tissue back to the commercial world if we don't start to address some of these adoption issues, which has nothing to do with the technology. And I think that's where the AI conversation, while it's very exciting, needs to get back to some boring things like acquisition, incentivization, risk, appetite, and some of these other things in the government leadership echelon.
We have 30 seconds left. Define risk threshold, and how does one know that one has the appetite to meet it?
Well, I think you have to know that if you fail at a small scale, you're okay with it. So failing or falling forward is better than standing still and being left behind. And that's the risk.
Jamie, Middle, and Zach, thanks very much for joining me. It's great to have you all on the program. You can read more about AI all across government at fedgovtoday.com. Up next, the defense and intelligence communities meet at the AI intersection. In Depth continues in a moment. If you want insights from agency and industry leaders on the latest topics in technology, management, workforce, defense, and acquisition, sign up for the FedGov Today podcast with me, Francis Rose. I release new episodes every Tuesday and Thursday, so you'll stay up to date on the issues that matter most to federal government leaders. Listen at fedgovtoday.com and everywhere you get your shows. Don't miss out on the conversation. Follow the podcast today. Welcome back. The defense community and the intelligence community in the federal government are both working on a long list of AI use cases and projects. Some of those projects and some of those agencies have a foot in both communities. Mark Munsell is Director of Data and Digital Innovation at the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. Thomas Boggs is Chief AI Engineer for the Leidos AI Accelerator. Gentlemen, welcome. Thanks for joining me today. Mark, I start with you. What are some of the use cases that you're seeing regarding artificial intelligence, things that people are actually doing with AI now?
So for our agency, space-based satellites that are collecting imagery of the Earth and activities of the Earth to inform policymakers and combatant commanders, the biggest use case that we have is something called computer vision. And I think people are used to computer vision in the context of maybe like a Ring doorbell. The Ring doorbell can see things in the front of the house or the side of the house and then actually detect what those things are and the movement of those. So essentially, it's the same use case as that, except done from low Earth orbit, where we're trying to detect objects of interest, things that we are trying to keep track of, things that we are trying to warn on, activities that our adversaries are conducting, and essentially using those artificial intelligence algorithms to find, detect, and then disseminate that data to the people that need it.
If we have time, I want to come back to the deployment of that, because it's one thing to build an infrastructure that's Earth-based to deploy these new tools. I wonder what it's like in space. We'll talk about that later in the conversation if we have time. Tom, welcome. It's great to have you on the program.
Thank you.
How does what Mark is talking about fit with what you're seeing as you look across the defense sector, the IC sector, and see what people are actually doing with AI?
Sure. So as we've seen over the last few years, generative AI has really kind of taken the world by storm. So everybody's familiar with ChatGPT. Everyone is trying at this point to figure out how do they integrate those generative AI capabilities into their infrastructure. So what we're seeing across defense, intelligence, commercial, civil, healthcare is how do we advance the kinds of things that Mark was just talking about? How do we do object detection, detection in signals, in audio, so on? Make those better, but then also leverage these generative AI techniques to then make sense of them so that we're, in addition to detecting what is in an image, we'd like to know why it's in there. Can we use generative AI to mine knowledge graphs that give contextual information to what's in there? Can we mine open source media to understand news reporting of why something's in there, what's happening? So how can we make higher level sense out of all of the information that we can then use those sort of lower level machine learning and computer vision algorithms to detect?
The two things that Tom talked about there, Mark, that I want to follow up on with what you're specifically doing at NGA. You've really taken the lead in using open source information and integrating that into things that you've collected in a proprietary manner. How has that impacted the way that you think about the tools that you described earlier in the conversation? And the other is just the whole concept of generative AI. Again, you've been on the AI train for a long time at your agency, but I wonder what the evolution of that has done as far as changing the way that you think about things.
Yeah, Francis, as you know, having done some work with the agency and the geospatial technology sector that's out there, we take anything that we can get our hands on in terms of open source, open information, and layer that on top of the information that we know is true and we know is right. And by fusing those things together, we come up with even a better understanding of the Earth in things in space and time. And so Thomas is absolutely right. The sort of boon, right, that's happening, the reason that everyone is inspired by AI today is this invention in 2017, 2018, the transformer, the T in GPT, and its ability to do much better job with larger volumes of information, especially text originally, right, with large language models. But now we see these unbelievable models coming out of OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, that are multimodal. And so as far as generative AI at our agency, it's a merger of vision, text and language, audio. It's all the modalities coming together and offering us the opportunity to fine tune these large models against our special data that we have that no one else has. And then we because of that, using the world's best commercial models and imagery, combining with our special data that no one else has, we have a treasure trove of information that we can do fine-tuning these AI models that no one else is able to do.
How much of your consideration of AI at NGA is based around the tools and what the tools may be required to do or can't do because of the nature of the mission of the agency, and how much of it is just we can use whatever tool we want, but we have to consider what data we're feeding into the tools.
I mean, the tools are the front line of user adoption, right? How a tool interacts with, how a user interacts with those tools, and how successful they are in interacting with those is kind of the metric that we go for in terms of user adoption. But we know that the tools aren't useful unless they have the really good, robust, accurate data behind them. So, you know, one of the techniques is today using generative AI to make data, to generate synthetic data, artificial data, that will train the models. And while we see promise in that, and we see a future in that, nothing is as good as when our analysts come in and validate, verify, and give feedback to those models. That's gold. That's what we need to move forward.
What drives that validation? Is it just having a human knowledge base that can review the results that the AI tools generate and say, yes, this is correct, or refine it where it needs to be refined, or is there more to it than that, Tom?
I think there's a lot more to it than that. So, you know, with these increasingly complex models, so trusted AI has always been a major focus, right? Which is not just about the accuracy of the model, but you know, is it unbiased? Is it explainable? Is it, you know, is it secure? Is it resilient? Is it robust to changing data conditions, right? So these large foundation models that we see out in the open source space, these are trained on massive amounts of data in an unsupervised way because of the large volume of data that we have on the internet that it's trained on, where we don't have human labelers who are in there labeling every piece of data. And so what that results in is that we do have a lot of things that are unknown in terms of how these models perform. We probably all heard of hallucination of you know, large language models. That's still a problem, and it's more of a concern in a defense context than it would be if you were just using a generic chatbot. So the focus is now really trusted mission AI. How do we take those open source models? How do we migrate them into a defense context, possibly in classified environments, and then fine-tune or adapt them to be able to be used in a defense context in an assured way, so that we don't have hallucinations or other kinds of anomalous behaviors when there is, you know, potential risk to life and limb from using these models.
You were nodding enthusiastically. What resonated there?
I think what Thomas said is super important. The fact that we are even here today talking about these fantastic models is because humanity has put everything out on the internet, right? This massive amounts of exhaust that are coming from our lives that are sort of feeding the internet, that are now feeding these models, has resulted in these remarkable models to be able to kind of mimic, you know, human thought and behavior. But of course, you know, there's a lot of stuff on the internet that we don't want to mimic or that we don't want to train our models with. So I think that's an important note. That's why, you know, the sort of separation between, you know, massive amounts of just public exhaust, I'll use that term, you know, kind of callously, that are training these models. You know, it has to be refined with data that is secure, that is high quality, you know, that we have protected to ensure that, you know, those are the kind of results that we get in the future.
So you used a term, oh, did you want to add something onto that?
Yeah, I was just going to follow on and say that, you know, classified data is classified for a reason. It's different than the data that you find in open source. The applications that data is used on in an intelligence context, in a defense context, are different, right? So simply lifting and shifting open source models into this domain isn't adequate. And we don't have an entire internet worth of data on the classified side, on the defense side, to be able to train those models in the same way. And even where we do have that massive amount of data, again, models still hallucinate. They still, you know, often don't perform in the way that we want. So it's a challenge for how we maintain human control of these models, how we can detect when they're operating in ways that we don't expect, so that as we try to move to increasing levels of automation in our workflows, in our you know, our intelligence processes, that we are assured that models are behaving in a responsible way, and that we have the ability to turn down that dial or control them if need be, because sooner or later, you know, models behave in ways that we don't expect, and we need to have a life cycle for improving those models over time.
All right, if we had a magic word on the show, it would be trusted AI, and you used it first, so I'll give you credit for that, Tom. what does that term primarily apply to the tools themselves, that one can trust that the algorithms there will produce results that are usable? Does it apply to the results that one gets, to the whatever the tool provides? Is it a combination of both, or am I off track altogether?
No, it's a great question. It's not just about the tools themselves, because the same AI model used in one context could be completely trustworthy and fine and low risk, and in another context, it could be very risky to use it, right? So if you're asking ChatGPT to make medical diagnoses for people, that's problematic, right? And so this is the reason that we've gone from trusted AI to trusted mission AI, because we're talking about AI that's used for a specific purpose. This AI is evolving rapidly. We're trying to keep up with it. It's not just doing things better than they were before, like detecting objects better or classifying them better. It's transforming the workflows, augmenting the way that people work, right? And this is happening in an accelerated way. So to maintain trust in a mission context, we have to have human-centric AI. We have to have AI where humans have insight into how and why they're making the decisions they are, because otherwise they may not, if we're talking about moving troops to a specific location and all the model tells you is you should move troops here, is a commander going to believe that without having an understanding of why that is, what alternative courses of actions there might be, right? So it really is not just about the model itself, it's about the human process in testing and evaluating that model, how we maintain human control, how we interact with that in a mission context.
Does that description of trusted AI sync with the way you think about it?
Absolutely. Use case is probably the primary way we segment the criticality of our models. But in context, for example, we'll have a model that might be really good at detecting something, and the use case would be go find all of those things, in this geography like that, and it might get half of it wrong. But the fact that it found half of the things that we're looking for is a great success. And so it all depends on how what you're using it for and the criticality of that use. It kind of has this framework of trust that's associated with it. In fact, it's so important on our side, the use of geospatial intelligence AI, GEOINT AI, to find and detect things for combatant commanders. That is such a critical use of AI. Our agency is establishing an accreditation program, just like we have accreditation programs for other uses of GEOINT, like GEOINT support to targeting. The accreditation of GEOINT AI models for detecting something for a combatant commander is just as critical, and it needs to be run through the paces just like the other important use cases of GEOINT.
It's an interesting transition, because we've talked a lot about the technology and applying the technology and mission delivery, yes, but we've talked less about the actual mission delivery itself. What are some of the things that your people at NGA are coming to you and saying, if they are at all? Is there a way that we can apply artificial intelligence to this technique, to this process that we do, and get better results, get faster results, get deeper results, anything like that?
Yeah, absolutely. What's interesting about this is we kind of started with this ubiquitous model or set of models that, hey, find military objects of interest very broadly. And so it was almost like if you can imagine like a radar, old-fashioned radar scope, like in an air control tower, where it's going around and finding blips. That was very useful. It's very useful to a combatant commander to find blips on the battlefield. How accurate those blips are, we can improve that. That's an enduring problem that we have to improve those. What we found is that there's like a million other use cases, and it all depends on the analyst, their analytic problem, the intelligence problem, or combat situation they're trying to solve. It can be broken down into very small, finite models that are going for one particular thing, and something that we wouldn't have even thought of in sort of the grand design of what we're doing here. So to give analysts the opportunity to be more dynamic, to maybe do some of their own labeling, build their own models, apply it to only one particular location or geographic area is very important for us moving forward. It's not a one model fits all applications. We have to have boutique models. We have to be able to provide analysts this special capability to do very detailed special work.
Tom, I think what Mark is getting at is something that is kind of, it turns the traditional way of introducing new technologies in government on its head. When the cloud came along and various other technologies, people would say, well, I want to get some of that and then figure out what to do with it afterwards. I had a conversation with one of your counterparts, Mark, in the IC not long ago, and I asked this person, what are you going to use AI on? And this person said, the question is, what are we not going to use it on? What's the implication of that for the way that people like Mark and others across the defense community, the intelligence community, should be thinking about introducing these tools, measuring their success, and so on?
Sure. First off, I want to second what Mark said in terms of having an AI literate workforce. That's critical for how we do governance of AI, right? Not just identifying the risks and mitigating those risks, but educating people so that they know, again, to what extent they should trust AI, to when AI is a partner for what they're doing, so that trust but verify, right? To the question of where are we not going to use it, right? We've kind of talked, I think, mostly about sort of what are the intelligence products, right? We're detecting things, we're providing information to analysts, but we have analysts and developers who are creating all of these products, right? We have a lot of one-off products, new things that are being created, and NGA is a large organization, Leidos is a large organization, right, across the intelligence community and DoD, and those analysts and those developers who are trying to build those products using generative AI and other machine learning techniques, they have infrastructure they have to work with. They have an IT infrastructure where they have to request access to data, where they have to request access to compute, where they need to find code, all of the resources. AI itself can be used to help provision those kinds of infrastructure so that we're not just using it for the end product itself, but for sort of the tradecraft and the workflow of how developers and analysts and machine learning researchers can more efficiently get access to the resources and create those products and then test them, in addition to just the end product itself.
Mark, we have a little bit more than a minute left. How will you know at some future point that you have achieved, at least are on the way to your goal of an AI literate workforce? What will they be able to do? What will they be able to use in order for you to be able to say we've achieved that?
That's a great question, Francis. I think that if we can get to the point where analysts feel comfortable with and understand using a model to assist them in their daily workflow and have some understanding of sort of what's behind the model, that's when we'll have a AI literate workforce that can feel comfortable using AI, also feel comfortable that the AI model is not going to take their job.
Mark, Tom, a terrific conversation. Thanks very much for your time. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you.
You can read more about AI in DoD and the IC at fedgovtoday.com. As you've probably learned from this program, the AI landscape in government is already filled with potential for the future and projects happening now. You'll stay up to date on FedGov Today TV Sunday mornings at 10:30 on ABC7 in Washington and on our YouTube channel, on the FedGov Today podcast every Wednesday wherever you get your podcasts, and always on demand at fedgovtoday.com. My thanks to our guests from TSA, DIU, FERC, GSA, and NGA, and our sponsors from Dataminer and Leidos. I'm Francis Rose. Thanks very much for watching. If you want insights from agency and industry leaders on the latest topics in technology, management, workforce, defense, and acquisition, sign up for the FedGov Today podcast with me, Francis Rose. I release new episodes every Tuesday and Thursday, so you'll stay up to date on the issues that matter most to federal government leaders. Listen at fedgovtoday.com and everywhere you get your shows. Don't miss out on the conversation. Follow the podcast today.